We trust doctors with our lives. They take an oath to protect us. But what happens when someone wearing a white coat harbors the darkest intentions? Meet Michael Swango, a brilliant physician who used his medical knowledge not to heal, but to kill. Imagine lying in your hospital bed, vulnerable and trusting. The doctor walks in carrying a syringe. Within minutes, your body begins to convulse. You can't breathe. And as your life slips away, you see your doctor standing in the corner watching you die, with a look of pure satisfaction on his face. This was the terrifying reality for dozens of patients who encountered Dr. Michael Swango. A man who didn't just break his oath to do no harm. He perverted everything the medical profession stands for. He turned hospitals into his personal hunting grounds. What I'm about to tell you isn't just a story of a killer. It's a horrifying account of how one man managed to move from hospital to hospital, state to state, even country to country, leaving a trail of suspicious deaths in his wake. How did he keep getting access to vulnerable patients? How many people actually died at his hands? And most disturbingly, why did he do it? By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how this monster turned healing into murder, how he manipulated the system, and most chillingly, how he derived pleasure from watching his victims take their final breaths. Dr. Michael Swango could have been any of our doctors. He worked at prestigious hospitals. He was charming, intelligent, and by all outward appearances dedicated to his patients, until they started dying. Yet no one questioned this until it was too late. Doctors hold a position of power. Think about it. When was the last time you questioned a doctor's credentials? When did you last wonder if that injection they're giving you contains what they say it does? We don't, because we can't function as a society if we're constantly suspicious of those meant to heal us. Doctors have access to dangerous drugs. They can be alone with vulnerable patients. And most importantly, death around them isn't suspicious. It's expected. Michael Swango understood this perfectly. Born in Tacoma, Washington in 1954, he seemed destined for success. Valedictorian of his high school class in 1972, former Marine, graduated summa cum laude from college. He was the kind of person you'd want treating your loved ones. But beneath that polished exterior lurked something sinister. Something that would turn the power of healing into a weapon of death. During his time at Southern Illinois University School of Medicine in the early 1980s, disturbing patterns began to emerge. Instead of focusing on his studies like other medical students, Swango was oddly fixated on working as an ambulance attendant, against school regulations. He would regularly commute 100 miles for this work, showing an unsettling eagerness to be around emergency situations and death. His performance in medical school was troubling. Despite his previous academic excellence, his work was shockingly sloppy. He mutilated his assigned cadaver during anatomy classes. He failed to recognize basic medical conditions, including something as fundamental as identifying a heart on an X-ray. But most chilling were the incidents with patients. At least 5 people died while under his care during his clinical rotations. His classmates started calling him 00 Swango, a dark reference to James Bond's License to Kill. Yes, even as a medical student, his peers recognized something deeply wrong with him. Just 1 month before graduation, Swango was caught faking checkups during his OB/GYN rotation. This wasn't the first time. Fellow students had suspected him of fabricating patient examinations as early as his 2nd year. The revelation nearly got him expelled. In fact, he would have been kicked out if not for a single committee member who voted to give him a second chance. Despite numerous red flags and concerns raised by both students and faculty about his competence to practice medicine, the school made a devastating decision. They allowed him to graduate and complete several assignments in other specialties. At that moment, a medical school had concrete evidence of his incompetence and dishonesty, yet they still granted him the power to practice medicine. This failure to stop Swango would have devastating consequences years later. Armed with his medical degree, he secured an internship at Ohio State University Medical Center in 1983. Once again, people noticed something deeply wrong, but once again, their concerns were dismissed. Nurses noticed two healthy patients dying mysteriously when Swango was around. One nurse even caught him injecting something into a patient's IV line. But when they reported it, they were accused of paranoia. Can you imagine the frustration and helplessness they must have felt? Instead of thoroughly investigating these allegations, hospital administrators chose the path of least resistance. They worried more about potential lawsuits from Swango than the safety of their patients. It's a pattern we'll see repeated throughout this case: institutional self-preservation trumping patient protection. The worst part of it is that we entrust our lives to these institutions, believing they'll put our safety first. When his contract ended after 2 years at Ohio State, Swango returned to his hometown of Quincy, Illinois in 1984, where he took a job as a paramedic with the Adams County Ambulance Corps. At first, his colleagues were impressed by his medical background, yet surprised a doctor would decide to take such a pay cut. Swango would often volunteer to make coffee for the crew during their long shifts. Sometimes he'd even bring in donuts or other treats to share. But then something strange started happening. His co-workers began falling ill, not just one or two of them, but several at a time. The pattern was bizarre. Every time Swango prepared the coffee or brought food to share, the paramedics who consumed it would become violently sick. Severe stomach cramps, intense nausea, dizziness, and vomiting would strike without warning. These weren't mild cases of food poisoning. Some of the victims were so ill they needed emergency medical care themselves. The incidents kept escalating. One day, multiple paramedics collapsed during their shift after drinking coffee Swango had prepared. As suspicions grew, his colleagues started noticing odd behaviors. He seemed to watch with unusual interest whenever someone ate or drank something he had provided. Some even reported seeing him smile slightly when they began showing signs of illness. Finally, in October 1984, one of his colleagues contacted the Quincy Police Department. What investigators discovered in Swango's possession shocked even veteran officers: a stockpile of arsenic and other lethal poisons. Police also found something even more disturbing: detailed recipes for various toxic compounds, carefully written in his own handwriting. The truth was finally exposed. This trusted paramedic, this former doctor, had been systematically poisoning his own colleagues, watching their suffering with cold fascination. And he had been doing it in plain sight, relying on their trust and the unthinkable nature of his actions to avoid detection. The man they had worked alongside, shared meals with, and trusted as one of their own, had been using them as test subjects for his deadly experiments. In August 1985, Swango was convicted of aggravated battery for poisoning his co-workers. But get this, for these calculated attempts at poisoning multiple people, he only received a 5-year sentence. And in the end, he would serve just 2 years of it. The punishment hardly seemed to fit the calculated nature of his crimes. From there, the pattern was always the same. He'd gain employment through forged credentials, work for a while until suspicions arose, then disappear to another location before any investigation could catch up to him. In 1991, he legally changed his name to Daniel J. Adams, a bold, calculated move to leave his past behind. The fake documents he cooked up were next level. He even forged a fact sheet from the Illinois Department of Corrections, turning his 5-year sentence for felony poisoning into a harmless 6 months for getting into a fistfight with a coworker. The lies were seamless, and they worked. By July 1992, now working at Sanford USD Medical Center in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Swango had perfected his act. He'd forged a letter supposedly from Virginia Governor Gerald L. Baliles, claiming his civil rights had been restored based on his exemplary lifestyle. His charm and seemingly impeccable credentials helped him build a sterling reputation at Sanford. He was well-liked, trusted, and considered highly competent. But Swango's carefully built house of cards was about to come crashing down. When he tried to join the American Medical Association, he ran into a wall. The AMA actually did thorough background checks. Their investigation uncovered the truth about his poisoning conviction. Around the same time, a Discovery Channel episode of Justice Files aired, spotlighting his case. Suddenly, the people he worked with were horrified. They'd been side by side with a convicted poisoner all along. Sanford wasted no time firing him, but in all the chaos, the AMA lost track of him for a while. A huge mistake. Swango wasn't ready to stop. He somehow landed a spot in the psychiatric residency program at Stony Brook University School of Medicine in New York. His first assignment? The internal medicine department at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Northport, New York. The familiar pattern emerged once again. Patients, many of them otherwise stable, began dying for no apparent reason. Just like before, death seemed to follow Swango wherever he went. But this time, something had changed. The deaths were happening more often, more blatantly. It was like every time he got away with it, he grew bolder, more confident that he could kill without ever facing the consequences. Veterans Affairs received a call from Sanford, letting them know Swango had poisoned their patient, so he got fired from his current position. And because Veterans Affairs is a federal institution, the FBI got involved and started investigating Swango's past. From Illinois to Ohio, from South Dakota to New York, Swango stayed one step ahead of the truth. But why? What drove this man to kill? Investigators discovered Swango's diary, and what they found was chilling. He wrote about the sweet, husky, close smell of an indoor homicide. He collected newspaper clippings about disasters and accidents. This wasn't just about killing. It was about the pleasure he derived from watching death occur. As a doctor, he had front-row seats to his own private theater of death. To understand how Swango got away with it for so long, we need to get inside the mind of this killer. He had all the hallmarks of a psychopath: superficial charm, an inflated sense of self-worth, compulsive lying, and, most chilling of all, zero remorse. He genuinely believed he was smarter than everyone else, and for a long time, he was. He had already been perfecting it for years. His obsession with death reportedly started early in life. As a child, he was captivated by stories of disaster and tragedy. During medical school, he spent more time working as an ambulance attendant than hitting the books, constantly seeking out chances to be close to death. Over time, this fascination turned into something darker: the active pursuit of causing death, all while hiding behind the trusted image of a medical professional. How is it possible that he was walking around poisoning everyone with arsenic and no one stopped him? Well, maybe the culprit here is technology, or rather, the lack of it. We're talking about the 80s and 90s, a time when technology was still in its infancy. Today, a simple Google search would reveal his history. But back then, hospitals relied on paper records, phone calls, and faxes. Information moved slowly, background checks were superficial, and documentation was easily falsified. Swango exploited every weakness in the system, understanding that each hospital operated in relative isolation. In 1997, Swango made a run for Zimbabwe. There, with another set of fake documents, he landed a job at Maneni Lutheran Mission Hospital. Sure enough, patients started dying under mysterious circumstances. The hospital's medical director got suspicious and quickly suspended him. While suspended, he rented a room from a widow in Bulawayo. What happened next would end up being his downfall. After sharing a meal that she had made for herself and a friend, the widow became violently ill. She saw a local surgeon, Dr. Michael Cotton, who suspected something was off: arsenic poisoning. In a key move that would help bring Swango to justice, Cotton convinced her to send hair samples to Pretoria, South Africa, for forensic analysis. The results? Toxic levels of arsenic. The Zimbabwe Republic Police Criminal Investigation Department passed the lab reports through Interpol to the FBI. Here in the States, the investigation was unfolding. It revealed a major crack in Swango's web of lies: his application to work at the Veterans Affairs Hospital. They found that Swango had lied on his government application, especially about his authority to prescribe narcotics. This small detail would turn out to be the key to his undoing. In June 1997, as Swango was trying to head to Saudi Arabia for a new job, immigration agents were waiting for him at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. During his layover, they moved in and arrested him, not for murder, but for falsifying documents and using Federal Postal Services to mail them. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to keep him detained while investigators built their case. They exhumed bodies. They interviewed witnesses. They gathered evidence that had been scattered across multiple states and countries. 3 bodies yielded traces of poisonous chemicals. They found evidence that Swango had paralyzed a patient with a lethal injection disguised as a sedative, leading to his death on November 9, 1993. They found evidence about Cynthia Ann McGee, a patient from his internship at Ohio State. Swango had claimed she died of heart failure. The investigation revealed he had killed her by administering a potassium injection that stopped her heart. The FBI had been building a case against him, and this time, there would be no escape. In 2000, he pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder and was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without parole. He was convicted of 4 murders. Investigators believe he may have killed up to 60 people throughout his career. 60 lives cut short by someone who was supposed to protect them. 60 families devastated by tragic loss.